All right, now that that's all over, let's start hearing from our speakers. Take it away.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Simon Offord. I am an attorney and partner with Brewer, Offord, and Pedersen. We are a real estate law firm. Our main office is in Palo Alto, and then I am primarily in our Chico office, which is where, well, I'm not in the office home now, but I'm in Chico. So we cover pretty much all of Northern California. And I'm going to talk to you guys today about and kind of introduce the topic for our arborists to talk about what are essential services and kind of getting into some of the nitty-gritty before we start talking about the more specific tree issues. So I'm going to share my screen so you can see my slides right now. And those should be up. All right, so same disclaimer, we don't need to worry about that. And let's get into essential services. So what are essential services? It's a phrase we've been hearing constantly. It's a phrase I've been dealing a lot with because I have lots of clients calling and asking what they can and can't do. And so in anything in the law, there's always hierarchies. So we're going to start talking about the statewide executive order that came down on March 19th. And then we're going to talk about some more specific restrictions. So statewide, the shelter in place is active unless you're what's considered an essential critical infrastructure worker. And in terms of what we're talking about today, some of those things that can be defined to assist with HOAs and property owners and property managers as it relates to tree issues are defined as services that are necessary to maintain the safety, sanitation, and essential operation of residences. So those are the key words we're looking at: safety, sanitation, and essential operation. So this can include things like, and these are specifically identified, road and line clearing to ensure availability of needed facilities, transportation, energy, utility issues, communications, and also support for effective removal, storage, and disposal of residential and commercial solid and hazardous waste. So local governments can be more restrictive or explicit on what they're allowing or not allowing. So Sacramento is an example. They have been a little more clear on what is allowed and specifically stating that arborists, landscapers, gardeners, and similar service professionals, but only to the extent necessary to maintain habitability, sanitation, operation of businesses or residences, or the safety of residences, employees of the public, fire safety, tree trimming to prevent dangerous conditions, things like that. Another example is Santa Clara County. It is almost identical language. It just has a little bit of clarifying language that it's not intended to be for cosmetic issues such as upkeep. So technically in most of the counties in the Bay Area, you're not supposed to have your regular gardening service to the extent it's for cosmetic work. There is, of course, gray area in that there can be an argument made that a regular mowing of the lawn or regular bush or tree trimming is necessary for safety purposes. So I have clients that have been on both sides of the coin on this, some complaining about their neighbors having work done, others asking me if they can have the work done. And because we're in a situation where this is all new, this has never happened before, this is the first time, there's not always answers to all of these things. So the magnitude and number of issues I'm dealing with clients, ranging from landlord-tenant issues to property management issues to Airbnbs to purchase contracts, anything in between. The answer I have to give a lot of time is it's not always clear because there's no cases or interpretation of these things. So what we're giving you is what they're saying, we don't exactly know how those are always going to be applied. So it becomes a decision as business owners of cost benefit analysis, reading what your local county or city might say. You can always try to call and find out from the county or city whether you are safe or if that's something that is considered as part of their ordinance or not. Chances of you getting an answer that are helpful might be slim to none, but you can always try. My experience has been that the the Bay Area counties aren't doing a lot yet on enforcing these things unless it's egregious. The construction activities seem to be enforced more than more uh, routine things like the gardening and landscaping issues. Okay, so again, no clear-cut answer, but some of the presumed service areas that will be covered statewide, obviously trees or limbs that are at risk of falling, it's essential to take care of those. Clearing those trees and limbs that have fallen, an issue that's near and dear to my heart living in Chico with the fire situations we've had and the campfire fire abatement issues are obviously something that considered an essential service. So that would include things like removal, weeding, trimming, etc. I will let Sarah and Sherry get into more detail about that. Ingress and egress routes clear. So that's everything from emergency ingress and egress to regular residential ingress and egress. That's certainly something that would fall under this. And then there's the others, which aren't as explicit, but most likely would be considered essential, dealing with invasive species, pests, diseases, things like that. And again, those are things that I believe Sarah and Sherry will get into a little bit. So now, duties of homeowners associations. Homeowners associations still owe their fiduciary duty to their members. So they're still responsible to maintain the safety of the community, and it creates somewhat of a fine balance. We have to ensure that there's no safety hazards from landscaping issues, but at the same time, we've got to minimize risk of potential exposure and frankly, just maybe upsetting some of our homeowners. So these are issues that the board needs to consider and weigh and look at what their specific city or county may or may not allow, and assuming it is allowed, then making sure we're minimizing that potential risk. And we're going to talk about that here in a minute. I understand there is, or there will be, or there has been a meeting that talks about conducting board meetings and all that. I just want to remind everyone, board meetings should not be conducted by email. We should be doing these by video teleconference when we're talking about whether we're going to have tree trimming work done or not. So just keep that one in mind.
That was a great plug, Simon. Thank you so much. Next week, we will actually be talking about that, so make sure to sign up.
That is important stuff. So yeah, you know, there's, again, we're in a whole new world, and what we're supposed to be doing and not doing is always changing, but good to keep up. Okay, so how to communicate with service providers. First, again, ensure the services are permitted under the local restriction. Look into it wherever city or county you're in. Make sure you're reading those ordinances and orders. Make sure what you're doing is allowed. It's always a good idea to double check with the service provider that they're comfortable and they agree that the work is allowed or is not allowed. The HOA is going to want to make sure the service provider has safety measures and procedures in place. So a lot of what we're talking about deals with the impact and making sure we don't have upset or confused homeowners or neighbors. So we want to obtain a copy of these safety measures and distribute it to the homeowners. And this is to hopefully quell any concerns that they might have and make them feel more comfortable, as opposed to seeing a crew show up and not knowing what that crew is doing or not doing. They know in advance that this crew is professional and they have policies in place. If the service provider doesn't have some sort of set of measures and plans, consider having your own requirements put in place. And that's something you might want to talk to your legal advisor with, or the county, or look at the CDC guidelines just to make sure that we've got good, safe protocols that are being followed. And then finally, ensure that the service provider is prepared to respond to law enforcement. There's going to be situations where surely a neighbor or maybe a homeowner that hasn't been paying attention or is just upset might call the county sheriff or the local police. And so just make sure that the service provider has a plan for that if that happens and how to deal with it. And I believe Sarah and Sherry might talk about that, but some of the things, that can be done are having some sort of documentation provide ease the. So moving on with duties of the homeowners association, HOA communications, give advance notice. Again, we want to try to get on front of it and not have people surprised. So explain what is happening, why it's required, why it falls under the essential requirements, and outline what the HOA is doing to protect the residents so people feel comfortable and not concerned, again, when they see the crew show up. And then be prepared in case of an issue. Explain the safety policy and how the service qualifies as essential, and respond to the complainant to establish that the work is lawful and safe, and hopefully appease them. Again, the more we do in advance, the smoother this will all run in the long run when the work actually happens. So with that, I'm already at 12:15, so I want to pass it over. In case anyone is interested, we just opened up a whole hub that talks about coronavirus issues and real estate. And so there's the website there. And move on now and let Sarah and Sherry take over.
Thank you, Simon.
And I am stopping my share here. There it goes.
Who are you two, Sarah and Sherry?
Okay. Oh, Sarah, I can't hear you, but are you going to share the slides?
You're on mute.
Guys, this is Sherry Weber with A+ Tree Service. Sarah's going to queue up our slides in a minute. I am the Urban Forest Director for Northern California for A+ Tree. And Sarah is a certified arborist and registered consulting arborist and takes care of a lot of our special projects with A+, and she's amazing. Put together our slideshow here. So go to the first slide, Sarah.
Can you hear me? Okay, I was just making sure my volume works. And we do tree care from all the way up from Washington down to San Diego and into Utah. And we love trees. We love people in trees, and we love the people under the trees, and we love our clients. And so we are very passionate about what we do. We do everything from tree removals to planting, and also we have our own mill where we turn things into tables and benches and put them right back into your community. So anyways, that's the whole revolution in tree care and sustainability. That's where that comes from. But we'll get more into that, and I'll give it back over to Sherry. And there you go. Can you see the slide?
No.
No?
We see the
What
first
do you
slide.
see?
A+ Tree.
Okay.
You could do it that way.
Let me see what. This way?
Yeah.
So when I play
Or-
it, you don't see it? Okay.
Sure.
Let me, you know why, it's probably, sorry guys.
It's okay.
Technical difficulties.
That
If
happens.
I share my desktop.
Now's a good time to go to my Facebook page for the chapter and comment your favorite song.
Okay. Now do we see the whole slide?
Yes.
You do.
Okay, there we go.
Awesome. So essential services in tree care, it's the #1 question asked right now. Are you still working? And the reason we are able to still work is for these items right here. So essential services are hazardous tree removals, removal of dead, dying, or dangerous limbs, treatments for pests that are left untreated that could destroy the tree, road and highway safety clearance, cabling or bracing of any hazardous trees, mitigating and cleaning stored damage, emergency response relating to all the hazards, and removal for fuel reduction in fire hazard areas. We do have a letter that all of our crew leaders have from the Tree Care Industry Association, written by our CEO in regards to these services. So just so you know, we have that. And sorry, I'm seeing the chat. Okay, go to the next slide, Sarah. Okay, so COVID-19 guidelines. Obviously, we're in challenging times and we're having to work and move a little bit differently. We are following policies given by the World Health Organization and the Center for Disease Control. We have new standard operating procedures. What this is including is hand washing stations for our crews, face masks when necessary, not inflicting any safety issues, while obviously they can't wear their face mask all the time with their safety goggles, etc. So if they're up in a tree, they're being mindful of that. We're having no more than 2 people per car, and then others will be driving separately. We are sanitizing all of our trucks, equipment, steering wheels, phones, doorknobs, etc. If you've been around anyone that was sick, it's mandatory that they stay home for a full 14 days. And then our job site protocols, we have been obviously keeping a distance in our workspaces. Our job safety briefings are done every morning and they're done prior to every job. They discuss the potential hazards of working in public areas, high target areas, surfaces, pedestrians, etc. We are working through any mitigation steps to avoid any hazards that may occur during our work time. And our meals are taken at a maximum social distance. When we stop for fuel, we're making sure to wipe down handles and washing our hands before and after. We're avoiding overnight travel. We're avoiding indoor locations, utilizing our excuse me, taking out, so our, I'm sorry, I just lost my spot. We're making sure that when the guys are taking lunches, they're staying at a distance, they're not eating out, they're bringing their lunch to the work site, anything that have less interaction in the field. And then our client interaction has changed a lot, as you can imagine. We're trying to do more with our tech these days, conducting our visits over phone and video conferencing, outdoor meetings only, and of course, no handshaking. And Sarah, if you go to the next slide for me. This is just a snapshot of our Arbor Plus, our program that we manage and maintain all of our trees in for our clients. And other people use different sources of different apps. And what's great about this is that there's an inventory of the tree, there's a tree assessment with photos and notes and recommendations. And with us having this technology, we're able to provide a service to our clients without actually having to meet them on site. We are suggesting to do, we can add multiple photos to the pictures in the system. We can do a FaceTime video for a walkthrough. We can do multiple photos or walks of the property by video and email it to the client. So that's some of the things that we've been doing to have less interaction in the field. And I believe if you go to the next slide, it's going to show you how this is broken up. So of course, different cities that we're working with all across the Bay Area, every city is different. Some have different rules. Some cities are open, some aren't. So for purposes, if we needed any permitting or anything like that, that we're taking care of. But this is a quick way to look at the estimate to see what it is that we're providing. And so we're able to look on here quickly to see what is essential and what may not be essential. So with the pictures and the recommendations, we're able to go in and determine, you know, what could be considered. So we can easily break up the estimate so that we can take care of essential needs now and come back for the rest later when the shelter in place is lifted. And this shows you a map, the pie chart, and then this is where I believe Sarah is going to pick up in regards to pruning.
Yes, hello everyone. All right, let me see where my speaker view is. Okay, I'm Sarah. Thank you, Sherry, for that informative information. So I'm going to go more into hazards and what to look for, because like Sherry mentioned, what is essential work under tree care. Of course, it's pretty obvious if a tree's dead. It's pretty obvious if there is a broken limb on there. And so that's easy to say, yes, that's essential. But there are other things that may not appear to the untrained eye that it would be essential work. So I want to get more into what that could look like, and if what is more considered a hazard and what may not be a hazard. So let me go ahead, and we like to call it the 4Ds. And this is when we go out and do property assessments. These are the things that we're looking at. Dead, it's pretty obvious. The tree's dead. Well, it's not always obvious. Sometimes it lost its leaves and you think it's dead. But then there's diseased, there's dangerous. So you see, if you're seeing large, huge cracks like that, that looks pretty dangerous. And distance, which is, for clearance of buildings and chimneys and things like that. And then these things maybe are not so obvious. We get a lot of calls, my tree's leaning, is it falling? There are two types of leans in general. There's the phototropism, which means that the tree is growing towards the light, and it's grown that way its entire life. So most likely the root system has helped grow it that way and is supporting that type of lean. It's not the best structure, and you do want to mitigate the hazard by, reducing the weight on the side of the lean, but that's also not going to be code red, we need to remove this tree. So that's called phototropism, which means growing towards the light. As you're walking through your community and taking breaths of fresh air and leaving your house, hopefully, then these are just some things you might start noticing. You might see a lean in a tree and wonder if it's growing towards the light. And then there's leans where the tree's falling and there's root slippage, and usually there's indication around the base where there's disturbed soil, or there's maybe some roots popping up, and that is give your arborist or tree care company a call immediately, because that tree is at risk of falling. Another one is mushrooms. So there's good mushrooms and there's bad mushrooms. The good ones is beneficial fungus. You might see it in your compost or in your mulch, and it's kind of just around the tree in no particular pattern. The ones that are scary and that is a red flag and is a hazard is when it's clustered around the base of the tree, and that is an indication that there might be basal or root rot. So anytime there is fungus, that means there is a decay of wood. So if you see it clustered around that base, that could indicate that the anchoring roots and that tree there's rot inside. We don't know how much, and it could be in through the center of it, or it could just be superficial on the just right around some of the roots. But that's where you want to call someone and say, can you do maybe an excavation? Maybe you could sound the trunk a little bit to see how bad this decay is. But if it looks like that, that tree is probably going to have to come out. And it could have a full and beautiful canopy and be at risk of failure. So whether or not the canopy has leaves or not, that's not always an indication if that tree is dying and is at risk of failure. So mushrooms like this pop up usually after some sort of rain or after irrigation. This is something to look for. If you see that, call your arborist. Another hazard that we get called out a lot is because if it's unknown, like is this tree going to break, there are bark splitting and fractures. So you have your non-structural on the left. That could be caused by sun damage, frost damage, just maybe some sort of disease or bacteria underneath the bark that causes that splitting. So that is more so non-structural, not a immediate hazard. Then you have the ones that are more structurally compromising, which you see down the union of the branch or across the lateral branch. So these are cracks that, yes, that is essential, and we should take care of that. And just to get more into structure. So going back to this slide, on the right side, I don't know if you see my mouse, but there's the two leaders that are like this, and you see the crack in the center. So that is what we call, that's a very bad structure of a tree, and that's what we call codominant leaders. And I want to get in more into this of what good structure of a tree and what a bad structure of a tree, because structural pruning could fall under does fall under this essential type of work. And that's where, to give you, so here's some examples on the left. And when you go out and walk your communities, you'll start seeing this more and more. And this is something I want to turn more people into tree nerds. and when you, so on the left, what I said earlier was these are codominant limbs, and this is when there's two leaders that are growing out of the same point and they're about the same size. So what happens is, as these grow, it can start pushing itself away from each other, and at some point that could cause one of the limbs to break. So on the right here, you also see you have multiple leaders. Those are codominant branches. And in the middle there, it says, we call it included bark. This is another arborist term. So when you see that, that means that there is bark that is kind of getting pinched between these branches, and it's developing at the junction. And that's a very weak point of the wood. And if there were to be a failure on that tree, likely that's where it would split. So these are what we consider structural defects when we're going out to assess these properties. These are the types of things we're looking at. And so when you see, something on your proposal that says structurally prune, then this is what it's addressing. Here's another example of poor structure. This is when you have many leaders coming out of a tree, and trees like this are at a higher risk of failure. As you can imagine, all of these trees are being attached to one point of the tree. So at some point, one's going to overtake the other. These types of attachments, we do see, a lot of limb failures from trees like that.
I'm a super newbie, and I see those trees and I'm like, oh, that's such a cool looking tree. This has been very helpful. Because when you're out walking your community, I mean, you could even put it in your newsletter, like what to look for, or if you have a tree in your backyard that could fall over the community fence,
Yeah. Yeah, I'm telling you, once you learn these little things or see these little things, you're going to start noticing it everywhere.
We'll never look at trees the same again.
Exactly. And that's what I'm hoping, is that I could turn everyone into mini arborists. So in the left, you have poor form. And so you can see those two codominant leaders. And on the right, you have a single trunk. And that's what we consider good form. So principles of strong structure would be a one dominant trunk, strong branch unions, and a balanced canopy. And also, doing this at a young age and a young stage of the tree is critical, instead of waiting until the branches are large and the tree is mature. Because when it's young, this is what we call, young tree training is one word for it. When it's young and the cuts are small, they heal faster, and the tree could correct for its growth, and you set it in a good stage for the future. And that actually prevents it from having more hazardous type of branch unions later in its life. And so, and the rule of thumb is, the smaller the cuts, the better. So obviously when the tree's younger, and you can make lots of cuts, and it'll be become a great structurally sound tree in the future. Whereas if you wait until you're doing it at a mature stage, then you're making these huge cuts, creating big wounds, and it really can't correct for itself in the future. And so this is a little quote that I like. When a tree has been pruned right, a casual observer won't notice it that it's even been altered. It looks natural, and that's not an accident. So a lot of times, after tree care or after your scope of work has been done, you may walk around your trees and be like, I don't see anything done to this tree. Well, there might have been a few cuts just specifically for that structure. So a lot of cuts doesn't necessarily mean you got your money's worth. A landscaper could have done that and totally ruined your tree. And so it's the right cuts for the right reasons. And so here's just more examples of pruning for structure. So this is a before and after. So you're aiming to develop and maintain a stable tree, removal and reduction of branch that competes with the leader. So you can see that there are some, specific cuts that is actually shortening the lateral branches so that it's developing for a central leader. And you're removing branches that are clustered together and growing from one point. So here's just some more examples. You want this or this, but not that. So a very good way of just pruning for structure, for example, in this one in the right, you would just take that right leader and you would reduce it by about a third. And just by doing that, it promotes the central growth of that one single leader. And over time, it will be a much straighter tree.
Sarah, we're over in time, so you might want to.
Okay, I'll be super. I have, I think, a few more slides. So this is just another example. It would just be a couple of clips there. And there, of course, are exceptions to this rule where you're having, more ornamental trees or multiple stem trees like the crepe myrtle, or if it's a beautiful oak that is mature, you're not going to prune for structure there necessarily. You'll just prune to mitigate any hazards. And then quickly going through this, we mentioned things, pest and disease. So red turpentine beetle, bronze birch borer, sudden oak death. These are things that are time sensitive and need to be treated for prior to all of the beetle activity, which would be considered an essential work. And then recycling and sustainability, just to touch on this, everything, we try to bring every piece of salvageable, it's a hard word to say, I still can't say it, back to our yard and back to our mill. And this is where it shows, some examples of some tables and benches we do. And if you are getting tree care done on your properties, keep your wood chips. It will save you money. It will also save you, when your landscapers are able to put it on your landscape, it retains moisture, reduces soil compaction. There's so many benefits to the mulch, and it increases the soil nutrients. So this is just something that always consider and think about when you get your tree care done, what you can do with those wood chips instead of having the tree company haul it away. And thank you. That's the conclusion of my part. Sorry, I went over.
Awesome. No, it's
So
okay.
No,
That was
there you
super
go.
helpful, especially because, so much of us are walking our communities and everything like that. Now we know what to look for. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to stop sharing your screen so we can go through some Q&A. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat right now. I know we're a little over, but we started a little late because I had my announcements, so we're just going to roll with it. And then actually, I am going to ask John Hanson to start his video and sound for a second because I received a question that doesn't necessarily have to do with what we're talking today, but I think it's very important. Hi, John.
Hey.
For anyone who doesn't know, John Hanson is our president-elect for the chapter, so I asked him to be on everything because he wrote my little blurb for me, my little disclaimer. So we had a question that I think is actually interesting while we wait for other questions in the chat about essential services. Last month, this person's associations conducted all their committee and board meetings through GoToMeeting conference calls. But a few of the committee chairs are now requesting to do the committee meetings in person at the clubhouse location and set participants 6 feet apart. This person wants to know whether or not, this as a manager, she should have to go to those meetings, if it's advisable, not to have them in person. I know I personally wouldn't feel comfortable with it, but I wasn't sure what your guys' advice was on that.
Well, it's a great question. In just about all counties now, or if not all counties, that sounds like a gathering that would be prohibited by the stay-at-home order. So I don't think that should be happening, even if you do engage in physical or social distancing. It still sounds like a gathering, and it's simply not something that should be risked. But it would be a question for that association's attorney to ask them for specific advice regarding what their local jurisdiction says about gatherings, how that can be done, and if that community's governing documents have requirements for how that committee is to conduct business, whether they could do it by a video chat or a conference call, or if there's non-urgent matters, could they simply wait and not take the risk? So certainly something to be cautious on, not take risk on, and to speak to the association's attorney about that.
Thank you, John. Much appreciated. Okay, we have a question in the chat. Is there a specific time of year that pruning is best?
So it looks like Sherry answered a little bit, but in general, oh, also we're in California and we really don't have seasons for the most part.
Yeah,
And so in terms of for the health of the tree, really any time of the year is fine. You might get more pitch or sap coming off of, pines in in different times of year. In the summer, for example, sometimes oaks, depending on the maturity and health of the tree, sometimes you'll hear, don't prune it. It's better to prune trees when they're dormant. So there are some, variation. In general, I would say there's not a big difference of pruning in the winter or summer. Sometimes we also do like pruning in the winter because you could see the structure of the tree better, and so we could help correct for that. But in general, for like the health, really, it doesn't really make a big difference when it's done.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, I think that you guys answered everyone's questions because I'm not seeing a lot popping up in the chat. But if anyone wants to get in touch with any of our speakers, just send us an email at the chapter. We'll be happy to get you guys in contact. Would you guys mind if we shared a PDF of your slides that you had to the group?
Sure.
Head nods.
Go for it.
Okay.
Sorry, I was on mute.
Okay. Okay, great. Okay, well, thank you guys so much. Please remember, if you wanted credit for this, make sure to comment it, send it to me in a private message with your information. And we'll see you all next week for board meetings. Bye, guys.
Thank you all so much
Thank
for
you.
listening to us.
Thanks. Bye.